आई होप मेरी आवाज़ आ रही है. आई डोंट नो कोई सुन भी रहा है कि नहीं. बट द होल पर्पस हैज़ बीन डिफरेंट. ये रीडिंग सेशन मैंने बेसिकली अपने लिए रखा है एंड इट्स अ वेरी सेल्फिश सेशन ऑन माई पार्ट. आई डोंट नो कोई यहाँ बैठा भी होगा कि नहीं, बट माई टारगेट इज़ कि कोई एक व्यूअर भी है तो आई एम फाइन. ठंड में and during COVID, a lot of things broke up. The first thing is discipline. Discipline इतना ज़्यादा गया हुआ है कि यार सुबह उठ के पढ़ना नहीं हो पा रहा था. To a lot of things. हर रोज़ कुछ नया सीखना ज़रूरी था. And at least for me, I find that very interesting. और मुझे रोज़ सुबह कुछ नया सीखना है. बट सुबह उठ के शायद वो एक दिन करूँगा, मैं 2 दिन कर रहा था या 3 दिन कर रहा था. एंड बाय द एंड ऑफ द वीक मैं सो रहा था 10 बजे तक, 8 बजे तक. एंड देयर वाज सम और द अदर एक्सक्यूज दैट आई वुड फाइंड दैट वुड जस्टिफाई कि नहीं मुझे सो लेना चाहिए. एक इंसान को 10 घंटे की नींद चाहिए, एक इंसान को रेस्ट चाहिए. दिन भर का डिजिटल फटीग रहता है, पढ़ाते हुए ऑनलाइन रहता हूँ, स्क्रीन देखता रहता हूँ. बट somehow I realized that I love this. So I want to do something good in the morning. And while I am doing that, I don't want to be alone. मुझे थोड़ी हिम्मत चाहिए. तो मैं YouTube पे आके बैठा हुआ हूँ. Given I know nobody's watching because कोई इतनी जल्दी उठा नहीं है. But I'll be reading a book. I'm starting with Freakonomics. A really good book. I found this to be really interesting. I think I got introduced to this book by my elder brother. He showed me the book and he told me a lot about it. But I couldn't really decide कि मैं इसको पढ़ना चाहता हूँ कि नहीं. But the pretext was कि जो daily life से related incidences हैं उनमें ये apply होता है. It talks about the concepts included in those. So I'll be starting with this one. Seems interesting. 3 major rules if you're coming to the study session with me. सबसे पहला रूल ये है कि no matter what happens, no phone. ये सुबह के 2 घंटे आप फ़ोन देखेंगे ही नहीं, ना मैं देखूंगा ना आप देखेंगे. We'll try and learn something new. You can study of your own course. आपको मुझे म्यूट करना है, आप म्यूट कर सकते हैं. Because I'll be reading the book aloud. मुझे वो अच्छा लगेगा क्योंकि अगर कोई मुझे बाद में सुन भी रहा है and he wants to know about the book और वो खुद पढ़ना नहीं चाहता है तो fine, he can hear me out. I'll basically be the audible. Opacity में कुछ प्रॉब्लम है, एक सेकेंड. Close. Why am I looking like this? ये इस तरह से क्यों जा रहा है? एक सेकेंड. ऐसा लग रहा है ना मैं भूत की तरह दिख रहा हूँ थोड़ा सा. स्ट्रीम सेटिंग्स में कहीं कुछ तो प्रॉब्लम है. somehow the opacity is not coming as it should. खैर मैंने काफी कुछ ग्रे ही पहन लिया है तो it's not gonna go away. Properties. No. यहाँ से भी नहीं जा रहा. खैर हमारा नियम ये होने वाला है कि no matter what happens, हम किसी भी सूरत पे किसी भी पॉइंट पे अपना फ़ोन इस्तेमाल नहीं करेंगे और ये 2 घंटा हम चुपचाप कुछ नया पढ़ने की कोशिश करेंगे. फ़ोन इस्तेमाल करना है तो YouTube चला के मुझे छोड़ दो ताकि तुम कुछ और कर ना पाओ. That should be your goal. So, moving ahead. I wanted to read Freakonomics for a while. I'm gonna do that today. जब भी मुझे लगेगा कि आई वांट टू शो यू गाइस समथिंग, कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट है बुक से, एक्सर्प्ट से, तो आई विल बी पुटिंग द स्क्रीन बैक ऑन जो आप लोग देख पाएंगे. जहाँ पे विल बी टेकिंग केयर ऑफ सम लाइन्स, हम कुछ खोज रहे होंगे, क्योंकि मैं बहुत अजीब ढंग से कोई बुक पढ़ता हूँ. आई डोंट नो, बहुत सारे लोगों को ये नॉर्मल ना लगे, बट मैं बुक पढ़ रहा हूँ एंड इफ देर इज़ अ वर्ड और इफ देर इज़ अ इंस्टेंस विच हैज़ बीन टॉक्ड अबाउट, कोई रेफरेंस दिया गया है, तो आई रियली वांट टू डिग डीप. मुझे जानना है कि उस रेफरेंस से रिलेटेड क्या है, ताकि मेरी इन्फॉर्मेशन क्लियर रहे. पता नहीं, ये अप्रोच मैंने रिसेंटली ही ज़्यादा अपनाई हुई है, बट आई एम गोना डू दैट एनीवे. Freakonomics, a rogue economist explores the hidden side of everything. Prepare to be dazzled is what the tagline is. So let's see how this goes. अगर गलती से कोई सुबह उठ के देख भी रहा है and you wanna put in something, आप कुछ लिख के बताना चाहते हैं, you can do that. An explanatory note, it starts with that, in which the origins of this book are clarified. Preface to the revised and expanded version. मैं preface वगैरह नहीं पढ़ रहा हूँ. Let's just go with how this starts. An explanatory note. Okay, we'll go with the explanatory note and we'll move forward from there. Camera slightly नीचे and थोड़ा सा zoomed out. This works well. नीचे किया इसलिए ताकि आपको पता चले कि मैं हवा में ही नहीं पढ़ रहा हूँ. There is a table out here. इसको लेके I am trying to study. एक second. I gotta change some things. Much better. All right. You can study your own. In the summer of 2003, the New York Times Magazine sent Stephen J. Dubner, an author and journalist, to write a profile of Stephen D. Levitt, a heralded young economist at the University of Chicago. Okay, so they're talking about some journalist. I'm going to mark that out for me at least. याद रहेगा. Dubner, who was researching a book about the psychology of money, had lately been interviewing many economists and found that they often spoke English as if it were a fourth or fifth language. Levitt, who had just won the John Bates Clark Medal, a sort of junior Nobel Prize for young economists, had lately been interviewed by many journalists and found that their thinking wasn't very robust, as an economist might say. All right, John Bates Clark Medal. नाम पहली बार सुना है, but that's the beauty of reading new books. You get to know new things. But Levitt decided that Dubner wasn't a complete idiot, and Dubner found that Levitt wasn't a human slide rule. The writer was dazzled by the inventiveness of the economist's work and his knack for explaining it. Despite Levitt's elite credentials, Harvard undergrad, a PhD from MIT, a stack of awards, he approached economics in a notably unorthodox way. He seemed to look at the world not so much as an academic but a very smart, curious explorer. Documentary filmmaker, perhaps a forensic investigator, or a bookie whose market ranged from sports to crime to pop culture. He professed little interest in the sort of monetary issues that come to mind when most people think about economics. He practically blustered with self-effacement. Self-effacement. Something to add to my dictionary. If you want the notes that I'll be making, good morning, sir. Good morning, Ronak. I just don't know very much about the field of economics. He told Dubner at one point, swiping the hair from his eyes, "I'm not good at math. I don't know a lot of econometrics, and I also don't know how to do theory. If you ask me about whether the stock market's going to go up or down, if you ask me whether the economy is going to grow or shrink, if you ask me whether deflation's good or bad, if you ask me about taxes, I mean, it would be a total fakery if I said I knew anything about any of those things." What interested Levitt were the riddles of everyday life. His investigations were a feast for everyone wanting to know how the world really works. His singular attitude was evoked in Dubner's resulting article. It is the excerpt of the article that I'm about to read. As Levitt sees it, economics is a science with excellent tools for gaining answers, but a serious shortage of interesting questions. His particular gift is the ability to ask such questions. For instance, if drug dealers make so much money, why do they still live with their mothers? Which is more dangerous, a gun or a swimming pool? All right, something that not a normal person would think, but yeah. Uh, what really caused crime rates to plunge during the past decade? Okay, crime rates have plunged. Do real estate agents have their clients' best interest at heart? I have a real estate business. Commerce Bhav. Hi sir. Hi. मेरा खुद का real estate business है. I would like to know this. Why do black parents give their children names that may hurt their career prospects? Okay. Do school teachers cheat to meet high stakes testing standards? Is sumo wrestling corrupt? Many people, included a fair number of his peers, might not recognize Levitt's work as economics at all, but he has merely distilled the so-called decimal science to its most primal aim, explaining how people get what they want, unlike most academics. He's unafraid of using personal observations and curiosities. He's also unafraid of anecdote and storytelling, although he's afraid of calculus. He is an intuitionist. He sifts through a pile of data to find a story that no one else has found. He figures a way to measure an effect that veteran economists had declared unmeasurable. His abiding interest, though he says he has never trafficked in them himself, are cheating, corruption, and crime. Levitt's blazing curiosity also proved attractive to thousands of New York Times readers. He was beset by questions, queries, riddles, and requests from General Motors and the New York Yankees and US senators, but also from prisoners and parents, and a man who for 20 years had kept precise data on his sales of bagels. A former Tour de France champion called Levitt to ask his help in improving the current tour is pro- help in proving that improving, I said improving, it's proving that the current tour is rife with doping. The Central Intelligence Agency wanted to know how Levitt might use data to catch money launderers and terrorists. What they were all responding to was the force of Levitt's underlying belief that the modern world, despite a surfeit of obfuscation, new words. Do you guys want to see what I'm doing on the screen? Why am I even asking? I don't know if anybody's watching. I'll be searching for the meaning of all these words. All right, let me show you what I am basically doing. थोड़ा सा डिले है. You guys will get the gist of it. Mhm. All right. So what I've done is I've made notes here from the things that I think it will be important. I've added words to my dictionary. So in some way or the other, I'll just select whatever I feel important. Like I selected surfeit or obfuscation, new words, and I'll be going down with them. Complication and downright deceit is not impenetrable, is not unknowable, and if the right questions are asked, is even more intriguing than we think. All it takes is a new way of looking. In New York City, the publishers were telling Levitt he should write a book. Write a book, he said. I don't want to write a book. He already had a million more riddles to solve than time to solve them. Nor did he think himself much of a writer. So he said that no, he wasn't interested unless he proposed maybe Dubner and I could do it together. Collaboration isn't for everyone, but the two of them, henceforth known as the two of us, decided to talk things over to see if such a book might work. We decided it could. We hope you agree. All right, so this is a collaboration of Mr. Stephen J. Dubner, an author and journalist, and an economist, Stephen D. Levitt. Introduction: The hidden side of everything. Anyone living in the United States. Just a second. Anyone living in the United States in the early 1990s and paying even a whisper of attention to the nightly news or a daily paper could be forgiven for having been scared out of his skin. The culprit was crime. It has been rising relentlessly. A graph plotting the crime rate in an American city over recent decades looked like a ski slope in profile, and it seemed now to herald that end of the world as we knew it. Okay, and it seemed how now to herald the end of the world as we knew it. Death by gunfire, international and otherwise, had been commonplace. So too had carjacking and crack dealing, robbery and rape. Violent crime was a gruesome constant companion, and things were about to get even worse. Much worse, all the experts were saying so. The cause was the so-called super predator. For a time he was everywhere, glowering from the cover of new news weeklies, swaggering his way through foot-thick government reports. He was scrawny, big city teenager with a cheap gun in his hand, and nothing in his heart but ruthlessness. There were thousands out there, just like him. We were told a generation of killers about to hurl the country into deepest chaos. In 1995, the criminologist James Allen Fox wrote a report for the US Attorney General that grimly detailed the coming spike in murders by teenagers. Fox proposed optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. In the optimistic scenario, he believed the rate of teen homicides would rise another 15% over the next decade. In the pessimistic scenario, it would more than double. The next crime wave will get so bad, he said, that it will make 1995 look like good old days. Other criminologists, political scientists, and similarly learned forecasters laid out the same horrible future, as did President Clinton. We know we have got about 6 years to turn this juvenile crime thing around, Clinton said, or our country is going to be living with chaos, and my successors will not be giving speeches about the wonderful opportunities of the global economy. They'll be trying to keep body and soul together for people on the streets of these cities. The smart money was plainly on the criminals. And then, instead of going up and up and up, crime began to fall and fall and fall and fall some more. The crime drop was startling. in several aspects. It was ubiquitous, another new word, with every category of crime falling in every part of the country. It was persistent, with incremental decreases year after year, and it was entirely unanticipated, especially by the very experts who had been predicting the opposite. The magnitude of the reversal was astounding. The teenage murder rate, instead of rising 100% or even 15%, as James Allen Fox had warned, fell more than 50% within 5 years. By 2000, the overall murder rate in the United States has dropped to its lowest level in 35 years. So had the rate of just about every other sort of crime, from assault to car theft. Even though the experts had failed to anticipate the crime drop, which was in fact well underway, even as they made their horrifying predictions, they now hurried to explain it. Most of their theories sounded perfectly logical. It was the roaring 1990s economy. They said that helped turn back crime. It was the proliferation of gun control laws, they said. It was sort of innovative policing strategies put into place in New York City, where murders would fall from 2,262 in 1990 to 540 in 2005. These theories were not only logical, they were also encouraging, for they attributed the crime drop to specific and recent human initiatives. If it was a gun control, a clever police strategies, and better paying jobs that quelled crime, well then the power to stop criminals had been within our reach all along, as it would be the next time, God forbid, that crime got so bad. These theories made their way, seemingly without friction, from the experts' mouths to journalists' ears to the public's mind. In short course, they became conventional wisdom. There was only one problem: they weren't true. There was another factor, meanwhile, that had greatly contributed to the massive crime drop of the 1990s. It had taken shape more than 20 years earlier and concerned a young woman in Dallas named Norma McCorvey. Like the proverbial butterfly that flaps its wings in one continent and eventually causes a hurricane on another, Norma McCorvey dramatically altered the course of events without intending to. All she wanted was an abortion. She was poor, uneducated, unskilled, alcoholic, drug-using 21-year-old woman who had already given up two children for adoption and now in 1970 found herself pregnant again. But in Texas, as in all but a few states at that time, abortion was illegal. McCorvey's cause came to be adopted by people far more powerful than she. They made her the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit seeking to legalize abortion. The defendant was Henry Wade, the Dallas County District Attorney. The case ultimately made it to the US Supreme Court, by which time McConney's name had been disguised as Jane Roe. On January 22, 1973, the court ruled in favor of Miss Roe, allowing legalized abortion throughout the United States. By this time, of course, it was far too late for Miss McCorvey Roe to have her abortion. She had given birth, put the child up for adoption. Years later, she would renounce her allegiance to legalize abortion and become a pro-life activist. So how did Wade help trigger a generation later the greatest crime drop in recorded history? As far as crime is concerned, it turns out that not all children are born equal. Not even close. Decades of studies have shown that a child born into an adverse family environment is far more likely than other children to become a criminal. And the millions of women most likely to have an abortion in the wake of Roe versus Wade, poor, unmarried, and teenage mothers for whom illegal abortions had been too expensive or too hard to get, were often models of adversity. They were the very women whose children, if born, would have been much more likely than average to become criminals. But because of Roe versus Wade, these children weren't being born. This powerful cause would have a drastic distant effect. Years later, just as these unborn children would have entered their criminal primes, the rate of crime began to plummet. It wasn't gun control or a strong economy or new policy strategies that finally blunted the American crime wave. It was, among other factors, the reality that the pool of potential criminals had dramatically shrunk. Now, as the crime drop experts, the former crime doomsayers, spun their theories to the media, how many times did they cite legalized abortion as a case? Zero. It is quite an essential blend of commerce, camaraderie. You hire a real estate agent to sell your home. I wanna select this word again. Camaraderie. Okay, camaraderie. You hire a real estate agent to sell your home. She sizes up its charms, snaps some pictures, sets the price, writes a seductive ad, shows the house aggressively, negotiates the offers, and sees the deal through to its end. Sure, it's a lot of work, but she's getting a nice cut. On the sale of 300,000 house, a typical 6% agent fees yields $18,000. $18,000, you say to yourself, that's a lot of money. But you also tell yourself that you never could have sold the house for $300,000 on your own. The agent knew how to. What's the phrase she used? Maximize the house value. She got you top dollar, right? Right. A real estate agent is a different breed of expert that a criminologist, breed of expert than a criminologist, but she is every bit the expert. That is, she knows her field far better than any layman on whose behalf she is acting. She is better informed about the house's value, the state of the housing market, even the buyer's frame of mind. You depend on her for this information. That, in fact, is why you hired an expert. As the world has grown more specialized, countless such experts have made themselves similarly indispensable. Doctors, lawyers, contractors, stockbrokers, auto mechanics, mortgage brokers, financial planners, they all enjoy a gigantic informational advantage, and they use that advantage to help you. The person who hired them get exactly what you want for the best price, right? It would be lovely to think so, but experts are human, and humans respond to incentives. How any given expert treats you, therefore, will depend on how the expert's incentives are set up. Sometimes his incentives may work in your favor. For instance, a study of California auto mechanics found they often passed up a small repair bill by letting failing cars pass emission inspections. The reason being that lenient mechanics are rewarded with repeat business. But in different case, an expert's incentive may work against you. In a medical study, it turned out that obstetricians in areas with declining birth rates are much more likely to perform cesarean section deliveries than obstetricians in growing areas, suggesting that when business is tough, doctors try to ring up more expensive procedures. It is one thing to muse about experts abusing their position and another to prove it. The best way to do so would be to measure how an expert treats you versus how he performs the same service for himself. Unfortunately, a surgeon doesn't operate on himself, nor is his medical file a matter of public record. Neither is an auto mechanic repair log for his own car. Real estate sales, however, are a matter of public record, and real estate agents often do sell their own homes. A recent set of data covering the sale of nearly 100 lakh houses in suburban Chicago shows that more than 3,000 of those houses were owned by the agents themselves. Before plunging into the data, it helps to ask a question. What is the real estate agent's incentive when she is selling her own home? Simple, to make the best deal possible. Presumably, this is also your incentive when you are selling your home. And so your incentive and the real estate agent's incentive would seem to be nicely aligned. A commission, after all, is based on the sale price. But as incentives go, commissions are tricky. First of all, 6% real estate commission is typically split between the the seller's agent and the buyers. Each agent then kicks back roughly half of her take to the agency, which means that only 1.5% of the purchase price goes directly into your agent's pocket. So on the sale of your 300,000 house, a personal take of 18,000 commission is $4,500. Still not bad, you see. But what if the house was actually worth more than 300,000? What if, with a little more effort and patience and a few more newspaper ads, she could have sold it for $310,000? After the commission, that puts an additional 9,400 in your pocket. But the agent's additional share, her personal 1.5% of the extra 10,000 is mere $150. If you earn $9,400 while she earns $150, maybe your incentives aren't aligned after all, especially when she's the one paying for the ads and doing all the work. Is the agent willing to put out all the extra time, money, and energy for just $150? There's one way to find out. Measure the difference between the sales data for houses that belong to real estate agents themselves and the houses they sold on behalf of clients. Using the data from the sales of those 1 lakh Chicago homes and controlling for any number of variables, location, age, and quality of the house, aesthetics, whether or not the property was an investment, and so on. It turns out that a real estate agent keeps her own home on the market on average of 10 days longer and sells it for an extra 3 plus percent or $10,000 on a $300,000 house. When she sells her own house, an agent holds out for the best offer. When she sells yours, she encourages you to take the first decent offer that comes along. Like a stockbroker churning commissions, she wants to make deals and make them fast. Why not? Her share of a better offer, $150, is too puny an incentive to encourage her to do otherwise. The book has really good analysis of different things, and I know this because we sell real estate, and that's one way to incentivize ourselves. We want to sell it, and we want to sell it fast. But when we are selling our own property, it's very, very different. Sir, PUBG Mobile India आ रहा है. Congratulations, PUBG Mobile आ रहा है. You can play that if that helps in some way or the other. If not, study something. Not that I don't play PUBG, but why? Why now? When in COVID, a lot of things are going chaos, a lot of opportunities are being lost. Why not create something new and go ahead with it? There's one way to find out. Okay, I was here. Of all truisms about politics, one is held to be truer than the rest. Money buys election. Let me just put it this way. Okay. Of all truisms about politics, one is held to be truer than the rest. Money buys elections. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Bloomberg, John Corzine. These are but a few recent dynamic examples of the truism at work. Disregard for a moment the contrary examples of Steve Forbes, Michael Huffington, and especially Thomas Cosliano, who over the course of three gubernatorial elections in New York spent $93 million of their own money and won 4%, 8%, and 14% respectively of the vote. Let's not forget Mr. Donald Trump. Most people would agree that money has an undue influence on elections, but far too much money is spent on political campaigns. Indeed, election data show it is true that the candidate who spends more money in the campaign usually wins. But is money the cause of the victory? It might seem logical to think so, much as it might have seemed logical then a booming 1990s economy helped reduce crime. But just because two things are correlated does not mean that one causes the other. A correlation simply means that a relationship exists between two factors. Let's call them X and Y, but it tells you nothing about the direction of that relationship. It's possible that X causes Y, it's also possible that Y causes X, and it may be that X and Y both are being caused by some other factor, Z. Think about this correlation. Cities with a lot of murders also tend to have a lot of police officers. Consider now the police murder correlation in a pair of real cities. Denver and Washington, D.C. have about the same population, but Washington has nearly 3 times as many police as Denver, and it also has 8 times the number of murders. Unless you have more information, however, it's hard to say what's causing what. Someone who didn't know better might contemplate these figures and conclude that it is also all those extra police in Washington who are crushing the extra murders. Such wayward thinking, which has a long history, generally provokes a wayward response. Consider the folk tale of the Tsar, who learned that the most disease-ridden province in his empire was also the province with the most doctors. His solution, he promptly ordered all the doctors shot dead. Now returning to the issue of the campaign spending, in order to figure out the relationship between money and elections, it helps to consider the incentives at play in campaign finance. Let's say you are the kind of person who might contribute $1,000 to a candidate. Chances are you will give the money in one of the two situations: a close race in which you think the money will influence the outcome, or a campaign in which one candidate is a sure winner and you would like to bask in reflected glory or receive some future in-kind consideration. The one candidate you won't contribute to is a sure loser. Just ask any presidential hopeful who bombs in Iowa and New Hampshire. So frontrunners and incumbents raise a lot more money than long shots. And what about spending that money? Incumbents and frontrunners obviously have more cash, but they only spend a lot of it when they stand a legitimate chance of losing. Otherwise, why dip into the war chest that might be more useful later on, when a more formidable opponent appears? Now picture two candidates, one intrinsically appealing and the other not so. The appealing candidate raises much more money and wins easily. But was it the money that won him the votes, or was it the appeal that won the votes and the money? The crucial question, but a very hard one to answer. Voter appeal, after all, isn't easy to quantify. How can it be measured? It can't, really, except in one special case. The key is to measure the candidate against himself. That is, candidate A today is likely to be similar to candidate A 2 or 4 years hence. The same could be said for candidate B. If a candidate A ran against candidate B in 2 consecutive elections, but in each case spent different amounts of money, then, with the candidate's appeal more or less constant, we could measure the money's impact. As it turns out, the same two candidates run against each other in consecutive elections all the time. Indeed, in nearly 1,000 US congressional races since 1972. What do the numbers have to say about such cases? Here's the surprise. The amount of money spent by the candidates hardly matters at all. A winning candidate can cut his spending in half and lose only 1% of the vote. Meanwhile, a losing candidate who doubles his spending can expect to shift the vote in his favor by only the same 1%. What really matters for a political candidate is not how much you spend. What matters is who you are. The same could be and will be said in chapter 5 about parents. Some politicians are inherently attractive to voters, and others simply aren't. I think we have two examples, Mr. Narendra Modi and you know. And no amount of money can do much about it. Messrs. Forbes, Huffington, and Golisano already know this, of course. And what about the other half of the election truism, that the amount of money spent on campaign finance is obscenely huge? In a typical election period that includes campaign for presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, about 1 billion is spent per year, which sounds like a lot of money, unless you measure it against something seemingly less important than democratic elections. It is the same amount, for instance, that Americans spend every year on chewing gum. This isn't a book about the cost of chewing gum versus campaign spending per se, or about disingenuous real estate agents and the impact of legalized abortion on crime. It will certainly address the scenarios and dozens more, from the art of parenting to the mechanics of the cheating, from the inner workings of crack selling gang to racial discrimination on the weakest link. What this book is about is stripping a layer or two from the surface of modern life and seeing what is happening underneath. We'll ask a lot of questions, some frivolous and some about life and death issues. The answers may often seem odd, but after the fact, also rather obvious. We'll seek out these answers in the data. Whether those data come in the form of school children's test scores or New York City's crime statistics or a crack dealer's financial records, often will take advantage of patterns in the data that were incidentally left behind, like an airplane's sharp contrail in a high sky. It is well and good to opine or theorize about a subject, as humankind is wont to do. But when moral posturing is replaced by an honest assessment of the data, the result is often a new surprising insight. Morality, it could be argued, represents the way that people would like the world to work, whereas economics represents how it actually does work. Economics is about all a science of measurement. It comprises an extraordinarily powerful and flexible set of tools that can reliably assess a thicket of information to determine the effect of any one factor or even the whole effect. That's what the economy is. After all, a thicket of information about jobs and real estate, banking and investment. But the tools of economics can be just as easily applied to subjects that are more interesting. This book then has been written from a very specific worldview based on a few fundamental ideas. Incentives are the cornerstone of modern life, and understanding them, or often ferreting them out, is the key to solving just about any riddle, from violent crime to sports cheating to online dating. The conventional wisdom is often wrong. Crime didn't keep soaring in the 1990s, money alone doesn't win elections, and surprise, drinking 8 glasses of water a day has never actually been shown to do a thing for your health. Conventional wisdom is often shoddingly formed and devilishly difficult to see through, but it can be done. Dramatic effects often have distant and even subtle causes. To answer The answer to a given riddle is not always right in front of you. Norma McCorvey had a far greater impact on crime than did the combined forces of a gun control, a strong economy, and innovative policy strategies. So did, as we shall see, a man named Oscar Danilo Blandon, aka the Johnny Appleseed of the crack. Alright, I want these 3 lines with me. This is how I can make notes. This note making strategy is really good. If I want something to be saved, I can get it over here and it gets saved directly. Experts, from criminologists to real estate agents, use their informational advantage to serve their own agenda. Good point. However, they can be beat at their own game, and in fact, of the internet, their informational advantage is shrinking every day, as evidenced by, among other things, the falling price of coffins and life insurance premiums. Knowing what to measure and how to measure it makes a complicated world much less so. If you learn to look at data in the right way, you can explain riddles that otherwise might have seemed impossible, because there is nothing like sheer power of numbers to scrub away layers of confusion and contradiction. So, the aim of this book is to explore the hidden side of everything. This may occasionally be frustrating exercise. It may sometimes feel as if we are peering at the world through a straw or even staring into a funhouse mirror. But the idea is to look at many different scenarios and examine them in a way that they have rarely been examined. In some regards, this is a strange concept for a book. Most books put forth a single theme, crisply expressed in a sentence or two, and then tell the entire story of that theme. The history of salt, the fragility of democracy, the use and misuse of punctuation. This book has no such unifying theme. We did consider for about 6 minutes writing a book that would revolve around a single theme, the theory and the practice of applied microeconomics. Anyone? But opted instead for a sort of treasure hunt approach. Yes, this approach employs the best in analytical tools that economics can offer, but it also allows us to follow whatever freakish curiosities may occur to us. Thus, our invented field of study, Freakonomics. The sort of stories told in this book are not often covered in Econ 101, but that may change since the science of economics is primarily a set of tools as opposed to a subject matter. Then no subject, however offbeat, need be beyond its reach. It is worth remembering that Adam Smith, the founder of classical economics, was first and foremost a philosopher. He strove to be a moralist and in doing so became an economist. When he published the theory of moral sentiments in 1759, modern capitalism was just getting underway. Smith was entranced by the sweeping changes wrought by this new force. But it wasn't just the numbers that interested him. It was the human effect. The fact that economic forces were vastly changing the way a person thought and behaved in a given situation. What might lead one person to cheat or steal while another didn't? How would one person's seemingly innocuous choice, good or bad, affect a great number of people down the line? In Smith's era, cause and effect had begun to widely accelerate. Incentives were magnified tenfold. The gravity and shock of these changes were as overwhelming to the citizens of his time as gravity and shock of modern life may seem to us today. Smith's true subject was the friction between individual desire and societal norms. The economic historian Robert Hilbroner, writing The Worldly Philosophers, wondered how Smith was able to separate the doings of man, a creature of self-interest, from the greater moral plane in which man operated. Smith held that answer lay in our ability to put ourselves in the position of a third person, an impartial observer, and in this way to form a notion of the objective merits of a case. Consider yourself then in the company of a third person, or if you will, a pair of third people, eager to explore the objective merits of interesting cases. These explorations generally begin with the asking of a simple unasked question, such as what do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? What do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? This is something that we can't really think about. इसमें पता नहीं क्या ही मिलेगा. Yeah, need to look into it. Imagine for a moment that you are the manager of a daycare center. You have clearly stated policy that children are supposed to be picked up by 4 p.m. But very often parents are late. The result, at day's end, you have some anxious children and at least one teacher who must wait around for the parents to arrive. What to do? A pair of economists who heard of this dilemma, it turned out to be rather common one, offered a solution. Find the tardy parents. Why, after all, should the daycare center take care of these kids for free? The economists decided to test their solution by conducting a study of a 10-day care centers in Haifa, Israel. The study lasted 20 weeks, but the fine was not introduced immediately. For the first 4 weeks, the economists simply kept track of the number of parents who came late. There were on average 8 late pickups per week, per day, per daycare center. In the fifth week, the fine was enacted. It was announced that any parent arriving more than 10 minutes late would pay $3 per child for each incident. The fee would be added to the parent's monthly bill, which was roughly $380. After the fine was enacted, the number of late pickups promptly went up. Before long, there were 20 late pickups per week, more than double the original average. The incentive had plainly backfired. Economics is, at root, the study of incentives, how people get what they want or need, especially when other people want or need the same thing. Economists also loves incentives. They love to dream them up and enact them, study them and tinker with them. The typical economist believes the world has not yet invented a problem that he cannot fix if given a free hand to design the proper incentive scheme. His solution may not always be pretty. It may involve coercion or exorbitant penalties or violation of civil liberties, but the original problem, rest assured, will be fixed. An incentive is a bullet, a lever, a key, an often tiny object with astonishing power to change a situation. We all learn to respond to incentives, negative and positive, from the outset of life. If you toddle over the hot stove and touch it, you burn a finger. But if you bring home straight A's from school, you get a new bike. If you are spotted picking your nose in class, you get ridiculed. But if you make the basketball team, you move up the social ladder. If you break curfew, you get grounded. But if you ace your SATs, you get to go to good college. If you flunk out of law school, you have to go to work at your father's insurance company. But if you perform so well that a rival company comes calling, you become a vice president and no longer have to work for your father. If you become so excited about your new vice president job that you drive home at 80 miles per hour, you get pulled over by the police and fined $100. But if you hit your sales projection and collect a year-end bonus, you not only aren't worried about $100 ticket, but you can also afford to buy the Viking range you have always wanted, and on which your toddler can now burn her own finger. An incentive is simply a means of urging people to do more of a good thing and less of a bad thing. But most incentives don't come about organically. Someone, an economist or a politician or a parent, has to invent them. Your a 3-year-old eats all her vegetables for a week. She wins a trip to the toy store. A big steel maker belches too much smoke into the air. The company is fined for each cubic foot of pollutants over the legal limit. Too many Americans aren't paying their share of income tax. It was the economist Milton Friedman who helped come up with a solution to this one: automatic tax withholding from employees' paychecks. There are three basic flavors of incentive: economic, social, and moral. Very often, a single incentive scheme will include all three varieties. I want to know about this too also, actually. There are three basic flavors of incentive: economic, social, and moral. Very often, a single incentive scheme will include all three variations. Varieties: think about the anti-smoking campaign of recent years. The addition of a $3 per pack sin tax is a strong economic incentive against buying cigarettes. The banning of cigarettes in restaurants and bars is a powerful social incentive. And when US government asserts that terrorists raise money by selling black market cigarettes, that acts as a rather jarring moral incentive. Some of the most compelling incentives yet invented have been put in place to deter crime. Considering this fact, it might be worthwhile to take a familiar position. Why is there so much crime in modern society? And stand it on its head. Why isn't there a lot more crime? After all, every one of us regularly passes up opportunities to maim, steal, and defraud. The chance of going to jail, thereby losing your job, your house, and your freedom, all of which are essentially economic penalties, is certainly a strong incentive. But when it comes to crime, people also respond to moral incentives. They don't want to do something they consider wrong. And social incentives, they don't want to be seen by others as doing something wrong. For certain types of misbehavior, social incentives are terribly powerful. In an echo of Hester Prynne's Scarlet Letter, many American cities now fight prostitution with the shamming offensive, posting pictures of convicted johns and prostitutes on websites or on local access television, which is more horrifying deterrent. A $500 fine for soliciting a prostitute or thought of your friends and family ogling you on www.hookersandjohns.com. So, through a complicated, haphazard, and constantly readjusted web of economic, social, and moral incentives, modern society does its best to militate against crime. Some people would argue that we don't do a very good job, but taking the long view, this is clearly not true. Consider the historical trend in homicide, not including wars, which is both more reliably measured crime and the best barometer of a society's overall crime rate. These statistics, compiled by the criminologist Manuel Eichner, track the historical homicide levels of 5 European regions. Okay, we have data now. The steep decline of numbers over the centuries suggests that for one of the gravest human concerns, getting murdered, the incentives that we collectively cook up are working better and better. So what was wrong with the incentive at these Israeli daycare centers? You have probably already guessed that the $3 fine was simply too small for that price. A parent with one child could afford to be late every day and only pay an extra $60 each month. Just one-sixth of the base fee. As babysitting goes, that's pretty cheap. What if the fine had been set at $100 instead of 3? That would have likely put an end to the late pickups, though it would have also engendered plenty of ill will. Any incentive is inherently a trade-off. The trick is to balance the extremes. But there was another problem with the daycare center fine. It substituted an economic incentive, the $3 penalty, for a moral incentive, the guilt that parents were supposed to feel when they came late. For just few more dollars each day, parents could buy off their guilt. Furthermore, the small size of the fine sent a signal to the parents that late pickups weren't such a big problem. If the daycare center suffers only $3 worth of pain for each late pickup, why bother to cut short your tennis game? Indeed, when the economists eliminated the $3 fine in 17th week of their study, the number of late arriving parents didn't change. Now they could arrive late, pay no fine, and feel no guilt. Such is the strange and powerful nature of incentives. A slight tweak can produce drastic and often unforeseen results. Thomas Jefferson noted this while reflecting on the tiny incentive that led to the Boston Tea Party and, in turn, the American Revolution. So inscrutable is the arrangement of causes and consequences in this world that a 2-penny duty on tea, unjustly imposed in a sequestered part of it, changes the condition of all its inhabitants. In the 1970s, researchers conducted a study that, like the Israeli daycare study, pitted a moral incentive against an economic incentive. In this case, they wanted to learn about the motivation behind blood donations. Their discovery: when people are given a small stipend for donating blood, rather than simply being praised for their altruism, they tend to donate less blood. The stipend turned a noble act of charity into a painful way to make a few dollars, and it wasn't worth it. What if the blood donors have been offered an incentive of $50 or $500 or $5,000? Surely the number of donors would have changed dramatically. But something else would have changed dramatically as well. For every incentive has its dark side. If a pint of blood were suddenly worth $5,000, you can be sure that plenty of people would take note. They might literally steal blood at knife point. They might pass off pig blood as their own. They might circumvent donation limits by using fake IDs. Whatever the incentive, whatever the situation, dishonest people will try to gain advantage by whatever means necessary. Or, as W.C. Fields once said, a thing worth having is a thing worth cheating for. Who cheats? Well, just about anyone. If the stakes are right, you might say to yourself, I don't cheat regardless of the stakes, and then you might remember the time you cheated on, say, a board game last week, or the golf ball you nudged out of its bad lie, or the time you really wanted a bagel in the office break room but couldn't come up with the dollar you were supposed to drop in the coffee can, and then took that bagel anyway, and told yourself you'd pay double the next time, and didn't. For every clever person who goes to the trouble of creating an incentive scheme, there is an army of people, clever and otherwise, who will inevitably spend even more time trying to beat it. Cheating may or may not be human nature, but it is certainly a prominent feature in just about every human endeavor. Cheating is a primordial economic act, getting more for less. So it isn't just the bold-faced names, inside trading CEOs and pill-popping ball players and perk-abusing politicians who cheat. It is waitresses who pocket her tips instead of pooling them. It is the Walmart payroll manager who goes into the computer and shaves his employees' hours to make his own performance look better. It is the third grader who, worried about not making it to the fourth grade, copies test answers from the kid sitting next to him. Some cheating leaves barely a shadow of evidence. In other cases, the evidence is massive. Consider what happened one spring evening at midnight. In 1987, 7 million American children suddenly disappeared, the worst kidnapping wave in history. Hardly. It was the night of April 15. The Internal Revenue Service had just changed a rule. Instead of merely listing the name of each dependent child, tax filers were now required to provide a social security number. Suddenly, 7 million children who had existed only as phantom exemptions on the previous year's 1040 forms vanished, representing about 1 in 10 of all dependent children in the United States. The incentive for those cheating taxpayers was quite clear. The same for the waitress, the payroll manager, and the third grader. But what about the third grader's teacher? Might she have an incentive to cheat? And if so, how would she do it? Imagine now that instead of running a daycare center in Haifa, you are running the Chicago Public Schools, a system that educates 400,000 students each year. The most volatile current debate among American and school administrators, teachers, parents, and students concerns high stakes testing. The stakes are considered high because instead of simply testing students to measure their progress, schools are increasingly held accountable for the results. The federal government mandated high stakes testing as part of the No Child Left Behind law, signed by President Bush in 2002. But even before that law, most states gave annual standardized tests to students in elementary and secondary school. 20 states rewarded individual schools for good test scores or dramatic improvement. 32 states sanctioned the schools that didn't do well. The Chicago Public Schools school system embraced high-stakes testing in 1996. Under the new policy, a school with low reading scores would be placed on probation and face the threat of being shut down, its staff to be dismissed and reassigned. The CPS also did away with what is known as social promotion. In the past, only a dramatically inept or difficult student was held back a grade. Now, in order to be promoted, every student in 3rd, 6th, and 8th grade had to manage a minimum score on the standardized multiple choice exam known as Iowa Test of Basic Skills. Advocates of high-stakes testing argue that it raises the standards of learning and gives students more incentive to study. Also, if the test prevents poor students from advancing without merit, they won't clog up their higher grades and slow down good students. Opponents meanwhile worry that certain students will be unfairly penalized if they don't happen to test well, and that teachers may concentrate on the test topics at the exclusion of more important lessons. School children, of course, have had incentive to cheat for as long as there have been tests. But high-stakes testing has so radically changed the incentives for teachers that they too now have added reason to cheat. With high-stakes testing, a teacher whose students test poorly can be censured or passed over for a raise or promotion. If the entire school does poorly, federal funding can be withheld. If the school is put on probation, the teacher stands to be fired. High-stakes testing also presents teachers with some positive incentives. If a student do well enough, she might find herself praised, promoted, and even richer. The state of California at one point introduced bonuses of $25,000 for teachers who produced big test score gains. And if a teacher were to survey this newly incentivized landscape and consider somehow inflating her students' scores, she just might be persuaded by one final incentive. Teacher cheating is rarely looked for, hardly ever detected, and just about never punished. How might a teacher go about cheating? There are a number of possibilities from brazen to subtle. A 5th grade student in Oakland recently came home from school and gaily told her mother that her super nice teacher had written the answers to the state exam right there on the chalkboard.
Such instances are certainly rare, for placing your fate in the hands of 30 prepubescent witnesses doesn't seem like a risk that even the worst teacher would take. The Auckland teacher was duly fired. There are more nuanced ways to inflate student scores. A teacher can simply give students extra time to complete the test. If she obtains a copy of the exam early, that is, illegitimately, she can prepare them for specific questions. More broadly, she can teach to the test, basing her lesson plans on questions from past year's exam, which isn't considered cheating but may violate the spirit of the test. Since these tests all have multiple choice answers with no plenty for wrongful guesses, a teacher might instruct her students to randomly fill in every blank as the clock is winding down. Perhaps inserting a long string of B's or an alternating pattern of B's and C's, she might even fill in the blanks for them after they have left the room. But if a teacher really wanted to cheat and make it worth her while, she might collect her students' answer sheets and in an hour or so before turning them in to be read by an electronic scanner, erase the wrong answers and fill in the correct ones. And you always thought that number 2 pencil was for the children to change their answers. If this kind of teacher cheating is truly going on, how might it be detected? To catch a cheater, it helps to think like one. If you're willing to erase your students' wrong answers and fill in correct ones, you probably wouldn't want to change too many wrong answers. That would clearly be a tip-off. You probably wouldn't even want to change answers on every student's test. Another tip-off, nor in all likelihood would you have enough time, because the answer sheets have to be turned in soon after the test is over. So what you might do is select a string of 8 or 10 consecutive questions and fill in correct answers for, say, 1/2 or 2/3 of your students. You could easily memorize a short pattern of correct answers, and it would be a lot faster to erase and change the pattern than to go through each student's answer sheet individually. You might even think to focus your activity toward the end of the test, where the questions tend to be harder than the earlier questions. In that way, you would most likely to substitute correct answers for wrong ones. If economics is a science primarily concerned with incentives, it is also fortunately a science with statistical tools to measure how people respond to those incentives. All you need are some data. In this case, the Chicago public school system obliged. It made available a database of the test answers for every CPA student from 3rd grade through 7th grade from 1993 to 2000. This amounts to roughly 30,000 students per grade per year, more than 700,000 sets of test answers and nearly 100 million individual answers. The data organized by classroom included each student's question by question answer strings for reading and math tests. The actual paper answer sheets were not included. They were habitually shredded soon. After a test, the data also included some information about each teacher and demographic information for every student, as well as his or her past and future test scores, which would prove a key element in detecting the teacher's cheating. Now it is time to construct an algorithm that would teach some conclusions from this mass of data. What might a cheating teacher's classroom look like? The first thing to search for would be unusual answer patterns in a given classroom. Block of identical answers, for instance, especially among the harder questions. If 10 very bright students, as indicated by past and future test scores, gave correct answers to the exam's first 5 questions, typically the easiest ones, such an identical block shouldn't be considered suspicious. But if 10 poor students gave correct answers to the last 5 questions on the exam, the hardest ones, that's worth looking into. Another red flag would be strange pattern within any one student's exam, such as getting the hard questions right while missing the easy ones, especially when measured against thousands of students in other classrooms who scored similarly on the same test. Furthermore, the algorithm would seek out a classroom full of students who performed far better than their past scores would have predicted, and who then went on to score significantly lower the following year. A dramatic one-year spike in test scores might initially be attributed to a good teacher, but with a dramatic fall to follow, there is a strong likelihood that the spike was brought about by artificial means. Consider now the answer strings from the students in 2 6th grade Chicago classrooms who took the identical math test. Each horizontal now represents one student's answer. The letter A, B, C or D indicates a correct answer. A number indicates a wrong answer, with 1 corresponding to A, 2 corresponding to B, and so on. A 0 represents an answer that was left blank. One of these classrooms also certainly had a cheating teacher, and other did not. Try to tell the difference, although be forewarned that it is not easy with the naked eye. Classroom A. 112A, okay. Classroom B. ECD2 4A 3A 1 2 DA. Okay, the pattern is same. Take a look at the answers in bold. Did 15 out of 22 students somehow manage to reel off the same 6 consecutive correct answers, the D, A, D, B, C, B string, all by themselves? There are at least 4 reasons this is unlikely. 1. Those questions coming near to the end of the test were harder than the earlier questions. 2. These were mainly subpar students to begin with, few of whom got 6 consecutive right answers elsewhere on the test, making it all the more likely they would get right the same 6 hard questions. 3. Up to this point in the test, the 15 students' answers were virtually uncorrelated. 4. 3 of the students' numbers 1, 9 and 12 left more than one answer blank before the suspicious string and then recorded the test with another string of blanks. This suggests that a long unbroken string of blank answers was broken not by student but by their teacher. There is another oddity about suspicious answer string. On 9 of the 15 tests, the 6 correct answers were preceded by an other identical string 3A12, which includes 3 or 4 incorrect answers. And all of the 15 tests, the 6 correct answers are followed by the same incorrect answer, a 4. Why on earth would a cheating teacher go to the trouble of erasing a student's test sheet and then fill in the wrong answer? Perhaps she is merely being strategic. In case she is caught and hauled up into principal's office, she could point to the wrong answers as proof that she didn't cheat. Or perhaps, and this is a less charitable but just as likely answer, she doesn't know the right answers herself. With standardized tests, the teacher is typically not given an answer key. If this is the case, then we have a pretty good clue as to why her students are in need of inflated grades in the first place. They have a bad teacher. This book has such a great analogy. It's actually giving me ideas about videos that I could make, that I wanted to make. It will be nice to do so. Started at 6, it's 1 hour 12 minutes. I'll read this for 7 more minutes at 1.5 hours. I'll take a break, go home, get myself some coffee, some breakfast, and come back to the office for the original work. That should be the plan of the day. But this is fun. This is fun to read a book in the morning. It is giving me so many ideas. It's a good start to the morning rather than having a very angry or some might say irritated morning in some ways or the other. I like this. Another indication of teacher cheating in classroom A is the class's overall performance. 6th graders who were taking the test in the 8th month of the academic year. These students needed to achieve an average score of 6.8 to be considered up to the national standards. 5th graders taking the test in the 8th month of the year needed to score 5.8. 7th graders 7.8 and so on. The students in classroom A averaged 5.8 on their 6th grade test, which is full of grade level below where they should be. So plainly these are poor students a year earlier. However, these students did even worse, averaging just 4.1 on their 5th grade test. Instead of improving by 1 full point between 5th and 6th grade as would be expected, they improved by 1.7 points, nearly 2 grades worth. But this miraculous improvement was short-lived. When these 6th grade students reached 7th grade, they averaged 5.5, more than 2 grade levels below standard, and even worse than they did in 6th grade. Consider the erratic year-to-year scores of three particular students from classroom A. Student 3, student 5, student 14, 5th grade 3.0, 6th 6.5, 7th. It's falling in the 7th grade. The 3-year scores from classroom B, meanwhile, are also poor but at least indicate an honest effort 4.5, 4.2, 5.1, 6.0. So, an entire room full of children in classroom A suddenly got very smart one year and very dim the next, or more likely, their 6th grade teacher worked some magic with her pencil. There are two noteworthy points to be made about the children in the classroom A, tangential to the cheating itself. The first is that they are obviously in poor academic shape, which makes them the very children whom high stakes testing is promoted as helping the most. The second point is that these students and their parents would be in for a terrible shock once they reach the 7th grade. All they knew was that they had been successfully promoted due to their test scores. No child left behind indeed. They weren't the ones who artificially jacked up their scores. They probably expected to do great in the 7th grade and then failed miserably. This may be the cruelest twist yet in high stakes testing. A cheating teacher may tell herself that she is helping her students, but the fact is that she would appear far more concerned with helping herself. An analysis of the entire Chicago data reveals evidence of a teacher cheating in more than 200 classrooms per year, roughly 5% of the total. This is a conservative estimate since the algorithm was able to identify only the most egregious form of cheating. In which teachers systematically change students' answers and not many subtler ways a teacher might cheat. In a recent study among North Carolina school teachers, some 35% of the respondents said they had witnessed their colleagues cheating in some fashion, whether by giving students extra time, suggesting answers, or manually changing students' answers. What are the characteristics of a cheating teacher? The Chicago data shows that male and female teachers are equally prone to cheating. A cheating teacher tends to be younger and less qualified than average. She is more likely to cheat after her incentives change. Because the Chicago data ran from 1993 to 2000, it bracketed the introduction of high-stakes testing in 1996. Sure enough, there was a pronounced spike in cheating in 1996, nor was the cheating random. It was the teachers in the lowest scoring classrooms who were most likely to cheat. It should also be noted that $25,000 bonus for California teachers was eventually revoked, in part because of suspicions that too much of the money was going to the cheaters. Not every result of the Chicago cheating analysis was so dour. In addition to detecting cheaters, the algorithm could also identify the best teachers in the school system. A good teacher's impact was nearly as distinctive as a cheater's. Instead of getting random answers correct, her students would show real improvement on the easier type of questions and they had previously missed, and an indication of actual learning. And a good teacher's students carried over all their gains into this next grade. Most academic analysis of this sort tend to languish unread on the dusty library shelf. But in early 2002, the new CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, Ann Duncan, contacted the study's authors. He didn't want to protest or hush up their findings. Rather, he wanted to make sure that the teachers identified by the algorithm as cheaters were truly cheating and do something about it. Duncan was an unlikely candidate to hold such a powerful job. He was only 36 when appointed, a one-time academic All-American at Harvard, who later played pro basketball in Australia. He had spent just 3 years with the CPS and never in a job improvement enough to have his own secretary before becoming its CEO. It didn't hurt that Duncan had grown up in Chicago. His father taught psychology at University of Chicago. His mother ran an after-school program for 40 years without pay in a poor neighborhood. When Duncan was a boy, his after-school playmates were underprivileged kids his mother cared for. So when he took over the public schools, his allegiance lay more with school children and their families than with teachers and their union. The best way to get rid of cheating teachers, Duncan had decided, was to administer the standardized exam. He only had the resources to retest 120 classrooms, however, so he asked the creators of the cheating algorithm to help choose which classrooms to test. How could those 120 retests be used most effectively? It might have seemed sensible to retest only the classrooms that likely had a cheating teacher. But even if their retest scores were lower, the teachers could argue that the students did worse merely because they were told that the scores wouldn't count in their official record, which in fact all retested students would be told. To make the retest results convincing, some non-cheaters were needed as a control group, the best control group. The classrooms shown by the algorithm to have the best teachers in which big gains were thought to have been legitimately attained. If those classrooms held their gains while the classrooms with the suspected teacher lost ground, the cheating teachers could hardly argue that their students did worse, only because the scores wouldn't count. So a blend was settled upon. More than half of the 120 retested classrooms were those suspected of having a cheating teacher. The remainder were divided between the supposedly excellent teachers' high scores but no suspicious answer patterns, and as further control, classrooms with the mediocre scores and no suspicious answers. The retest was given a few weeks after the original exam. The children were not told the reason for the retest, neither were the teachers, but they may have gotten the idea when it was announced that CPS officials, not the teachers, would administer the test. The teachers were asked to stay in the classroom with their students, but they would not be allowed to even touch the answer sheets. The results were as compelling as the cheating algorithm as predicted. In the classroom chosen as control, where no cheating was suspected, scores stayed about the same or even rose. In contrast, the students with the teachers identified as cheaters scored far worse, by an average of more than a full grade level. As a result, the Chicago public school system began to fire its cheating teachers. The evidence was only strong enough to get rid of a dozen of them, but the many of the other teachers had been duly warned. The final outcome of the Chicago study is further a testament to the power of incentives. The following year, cheating by teachers fell more than 30%. You might think that sophistication of teachers who cheat would increase along with the level of schooling, but an exam given to the University of Georgia in the fall of 2001 disputes that idea. The course was called Coaching Principles and Strategies of Basketball, and the final grade was based on a single exam that had 20 questions. Among the questions, how many halves are in a college basketball game? 2. How many points does 3-point field goal account for in basketball game? 3. What is the name of the exam with all high school seniors in the state of Georgia must pass? In your opinion, who is the best Division 1 assistant coach in the country? If you're stumped by the final question, it might help to know that coaching principles was taught by Jim Herrick Jr., an assistant coach with the university basketball team. It might also help to know that his father, Jim Herrick Sr., was the head basketball coach. Not surprisingly, coaching principles was a favorite course among players on the Herrick's team. Even students in class received an A. Every student in the class received an A. Not long afterward, both Herricks were relieved of their coaching duties. If it strikes you as disgraceful that Chicago school teachers in University of Georgia professors will cheat, a teacher after all is meant to instill values along with the facts, then the thought of cheating among sumo wrestlers may also be deeply disturbing. In Japan, sumo is not only national sport but also a repository of country's religious, military and historical emotion. With its purification rituals and its imperial roots, sumo is sacrosanct in a way that American sports will never be. Indeed, sumo is said to be less about competition than about honor itself. We'll learn about sumo wrestling later. It is 7:33. I'll be moving forward with the day. हम पेज 50 तक पहुंचे थे. That's a good read. हम पेज 50 तक पहुंच गए. That's really well for us. डेढ़ घंटे में 50 तो नहीं, ऊपर के 5 पन्ने छोड़ देते हैं. 40 पन्ने भी अगर हमने पढ़े हैं तो बहुत अच्छी बात है. In which I am reading out aloud. I hope you guys also studied. ये सुबह का 1.5 घंटा आपने इस्तेमाल किया सही ढंग से. आप जो भी करना चाहते थे, जो अच्छी चीज़ें आप कर सकते थे उनके रिगार्डिंग. I hope to see you tomorrow and maybe every day if I can make it. But that's the whole point of this experiment. Can I make it every day when I get to know that there will be somebody or maybe nobody watching me? That's the whole point. COVID has taught us one thing, that self-discipline is something that we have to bring. If there is self-discipline, we can succeed. If not, we can lose. I'll see you in the next stream. Till then, goodbye, take care, and have a good day. Use every hour in the best possible manner as you can. Thank you. Bye bye.